Up 11, dig it. This is the wicked time from the planet E. Shocking when I would like to take you on a trip. Come on along now and listen to our tunes. Just sit back as we go zoom, zoom, zoom. Who is she and what's the trouble? Who's the girl?
Hey guys, welcome to Frank's Tech Help. So today I'm going to be showing you guys how to upgrade the front axle system on the HBX 12891 from the plastic axle to the full metal axle kit. So in my previous video I showed you guys how to do the rear axle system, and the front one is a little bit different. It's a little more tricky to get into. There's a very difficult way to do this, and then there's a little cheat that I discovered that's going to make your life a lot easier if you decide to do this upgrade. So for this upgrade, the rear axle system, I use the RedCat part number 12711C, and for this one, this is the RedCat part number 12710C. As you can, gotta get focus there, as you can see right there. And so I'll just give you a little quick view here. This is what is included in the kit right here. So just as with the rear axle system, you have your dog bones, which are attached permanently to the outer cup, where the tires will attach to, one for each side. You have your metal inner cup, which once we tear down the differential, front differential, we'll mount these inside with the screws. And then you have your tire locks and then your lug nuts to go on the end of that. So I'm going to go ahead and scoot this out of the way here real quick, and I'll show you what we're doing. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and pop the top off of here so that we can dig right into this. So on the back side here, you can see the previous modification that I performed is to the metal rear axle system there. So for this mod upgrade, we're going to be doing the front axle system, which you can see the axles right here. This is all plastic as far as that. So now, as I mentioned, there's a very difficult way to do this, and there's a very easy way to do this. So I'm going to show you guys the little cheat that I came up with. I'm going to tear down the entire front end here, remove the upper bars, and then just disassemble this front section right here. I'm not going to do the entire teardown because otherwise you have to take the entire vehicle apart. So first off, let's just go ahead and jump into this. You're going to want to remove the front lower skid plate, and it consists of 2 screws right here, and then there's one on the top on the inside right here. So I'll go ahead and get those out of the way. Alright, so now that I've removed the 3 screws from there, if you flip this over, this will actually release the front bumper and the lower skid plate, and you just got to wiggle it around there a little bit until it loosens up enough to pop off of there, like that. It comes off like that, and then that will expose the pins holding the lower control arms in place. You don't need to do anything with those, just leave that there for the moment. The next thing we need to do is we need to tear down the front shock system here, and I'm just going to disconnect these 2 shocks and then take out the 6 bolts right here, and this will remove the shock housing. So go ahead and do that real quick. Okay, so I've got the 4 primary bolts from the upper shock system removed. These 2 bolts right here not only hold the upper shock housing in place, but also keeps the control arms in place. So when you remove these 2 screws, be prepared because the control arms will disconnect, which is fine. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so one thing to note, that these screws only come out a certain distance because the thread is only on the end of this. The rest of it's just a straight rod, so once you unscrew it just a little bit, you can go ahead and just pull the rods the rest of the way out like that. Set those aside. So then when you pull that last rod out, you'll see that the entire front of the shock housing comes out of place there, which is what we want. So from there, this disconnects the upper control arms. You just pop those, and the axles, everything will just kind of fall away from that section right there. pull that back out of the way like that. So there we have the front end. Get it in the right angle for you. Kind of disassembled there. Now there's no reason to do a complete teardown on the front side of this just to get the housing and the differential out of here. Like I said, there's a hard way to do this and an easy way to do that. So holding the differential in the upper housing, there are 2 bolts on this side, 2 bolts on this side, and then there are 2 more under here, which we'll get to in a moment. But before we do that, we need to remove the 2, 4, 6 bolts, 3 on either side, and I'll go ahead and remove those real quick. Okay, so now that I have those 6 bolts removed from there, you'll notice there's some play right here where this front mount system is loose now. And underneath there, on one side, it's just a support bar. If you can see that right there. And then on the other side, this is actually the control arm for the servo, which you'll see runs up through here and connects right there. So for this process, we do actually need to disconnect the servo arm, control arm. So I'm going to push it all the way back so that I know that it's in its proper position. Let me get the wheels turned back around here so I can push it all the way back. So I'm going to push the servo all the way back so I can note that position that it's in, and then we're just going to remove the top bolt from right here on the servo. Alright, so now that I have that screw loosened up there, just go ahead and pull it out like that and set that along with the spring, set it aside. And then you want to go ahead and lift your control arm for the servo just up off of that housing right there, and it disconnects like that right there. So then now you can move the servo control arm kind of out of the way. Now here's where the cheat comes in. Underneath here, if I can get it in the right position, I may have to zoom in for this one. There are 2 small screws. One, let me get my little screwdriver here so I can point it out to you. So the first one is right here. You see at the end of my screwdriver, there's one there, and there's an identical one on the opposite side, which is just under the control arm. So this bar that runs across right here is actually blocking those 2 bolts. So that's the reason you need to lift the servo kind of control arm up out of the way, because all you have to do really is just lift this up just a little bit right here. And if you want to make it easier, there's a little clips on the edge of the servo motor itself right there that kind of block it in, but I'm not going to concern myself with trying to remove those screws. I'm just going to go straight in here. Now if you get your screwdriver just at the right angle, I'm going to zoom back out here a little bit, and you go in at the right angle, you can get to those screws like that right there, if you can see that, and you're just going to twist them out the best you can to get it started until they're loose. Alright, so if you can see, that screw is actually lifting up right there, and you don't have to go all the way with this because it's probably going to stress your the edge of the screwdriver, that bolt. So I'm going to get up under the other side here and loosen this bolt up as well. I don't know if I can get that into the camera or not, but get up there at an angle and loosen that one up. Okay, so from there, now that you have the 2 bolts kind of loosened up, you want to use a smaller screwdriver, because this is going to take the pressure off of those screws when you go in to take those out, and just get it propped into the position, into the end of that screw. If I can get that at the right angle there. I'm not sure if you can see that or not, but so I'm just using a small screwdriver to take this the rest of the way out. That way it doesn't put so much pressure on there. And from there, there's one screw out, and here's the second screw coming out right there. So it just makes it easier to get those 2 screws in and out. So I'm going to go ahead and set these aside. And then from there, the last 4 screws will be right here. 1, 2, and on the other side 3, 4, and this will finally release the top housing of the differential. So we're going to prop this down here and get these screws out real quick. Okay, so here we have it. All of the screws for the upper differential housing have been removed. So from this point, you're going to lift up your servo arm a little bit, and you're going to try to push it out of the way the best that you can. Now on this side, if you lift up right here and then lift up on the servo arm just a little bit to separate that, you can actually raise that arm up just a little bit to give you some more clearance to remove the differential. So just pop that up there. You don't have to go far with it. And then from there, lift up on the front housing here, and from there the differential housing should lift up, and then you can just kind of twist it over and out of the way like that right there. Now you don't have to remove this completely, because you're gonna have to deal with trying to get it back around that servo arm that's in there. So from this point, all you need to do is just lift the differential out, and that's what we're working on here. Alright, so now that we have the differential out, we're going to go ahead and disassemble this, and we're going to replace the plastic inner cups with the metal inner cups. And this process, this differential is pretty much identical to the rear differential from my previous video where I did the metal axles for the rear end. So we're just going to do the same process for this and tear this down real quick. So you do have the 4 screws in the top plate right here that need to be removed, so I'll go ahead and do that real quick. Alright, so now that I have the screws out of the metal housing there of the differential, we're going to separate this. And as you can see on the inside, you have the gears. It depends kind of which side it sticks on when you get to this point. But so we're going to go ahead and set one half of this aside. And as in our previous video, there is a screw holding the plastic inner cup into place, and it's buried under the grease here. So I'm just going to kind of push the grease out of the way so we can save as much of that as possible. Just put it to the side here. And then I'm going to go ahead and put my screwdriver in the center there and release the screw holding the inner cup in place. Now you will want to take these screws and just set them aside because you won't be using these again unless you go back to the plastic gears. You're going to go ahead and just pick your gear up, make sure that your inner bearings kind of stay in place there. And on the plastic housing, on the plastic joints, if we're replacing this, there are 2 little parts that stick out right there that do fit down into a couple of little crevices right there. It's not necessary on the metal because the metal one does not have those. So you put your finger on the outside to hold this in place, and then just kind of twist it until it pops into place, and there you have it. So we'll go ahead and take the new screw, which came with the metal inner cups, and put that into place in the center there. And then you might reverse thread it for a second so you hear it click. That way you get a nice good straight. Screws it in nice and straight there, so go ahead and get that in place. So once the screw goes all the way in, you will want to give it one nice tight twist at the end there to make sure it's nice and tight and it's going to stay in place. Now instead of touching all of this with tweezers or doing whatever, I usually just prop this back over to the side here, pop it back in there and kind of swish it around a little bit. And then the gears usually come out off the opposite side like that right there. So now that you have your gears kind of propped out from one side to the other side, you just want to take this very carefully and set it aside until we're done with that. And then we're going to perform the same process on this side, taking out the center screw and then replacing that with the other metal cup for the inside of that. So once again, I'm going to take my little screwdriver here, get to the inside, take this screw out. So then once that screw is almost out, you just want to take it and set it aside there. And very carefully, when you pull this off, just make sure that this inner bearing stays attached and in place there. And then that one will slide out just the same as the other one. So we'll go ahead and set these aside, and we'll grab the cup for this side. And once again, this little inner ring right here is going to want to push out, so you might just put your finger in there and kind of keep that, hold it in place there, and then push that back in. So there, make sure you have it like that. So then we're going to take the new screw, put it on the end here, straight down in, and screw this one back into place as well. And once again, at the end, give it a nice tight twist there, and then you'll see that it spins freely on the inside of that. And that's pretty much it for the inner cup system. From there, you want to go ahead and line this back up, and there are 4 screw holes right here, and then you just want to match those up with the screw holes on the top, like so. And you can look down into the side there. Once you get to this point, you can actually see that it is lined up with the holes there. So from this point, I'm going to go ahead and put the screws back in, and I am going to skip. I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, 4 to give even distribution when I torque the screws back into place there. Just kind of like putting on a car tire there. So let's go ahead and knock this out. And so now the final test is that you want to spin the differential around there, and you can see that it's moving freely on that. So now it's time to switch out the axles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and reassemble this, put this back into the Ford differential. Now for gear grease, you can use just about anything you get from the auto parts store. I'm going to put a little extra in here. I'm actually using some premium high temp wheel bearing grease like this, and you just want to take a little dab out of here. Now, being that this vehicle is brand new, I have an older one that I had to re-grease once I tore down the differential to make some repairs. So on this, you basically just put a little dab will do you. You don't even have to go all the way around, because once it spins around enough, it's going to take care of itself. So I'm going to go ahead and get the differential put back into place, and the main thing is just to make sure that the gear locks into place when you put it back down in there. So it's pretty simple. Just twist a little bit, make sure it's locked back in, and then lift up on your control arm just a little bit and get this housing kind of back into place there. So there you can see that the housing just simply drops back in. So I'm going to go ahead and put the 4 external screws back on here, and then we'll get to the axle replacement. So from here, we need to lift the control arm back up out of place and get our 2 rear screws back in. So when you go to put these back in, you just want to try to make them as straight as possible when you get them first going back into place there. And if I can get this at the right angle, I'll be able to show you what's going on here as it goes back down and into the slot right there. And just lift up on this little plastic right here, and just try to make that as straight as you can. And you can actually use your small screwdriver and push it back, screw it in as far as you can, and then do the same thing on this other side. Alright, now that I've got it in place, I'm going to show you guys on this side. So I'm going to reverse thread here for a second until I get it straight as I can, and then screw it back down in there by hand with the small one. And then from there, you want to go back to your big screwdriver and go in there just to finish it off. Make sure that it's nice and tight as far as that goes. Nice and tight there. Same thing on the other side. Tighten it down. Just a good hand tightening there. Alright, so that takes care of the differential system. So from this point, you can go ahead and put the servo back in, and then put these screws back into place. So I am going to push the servo all the way back to where it was originally in position, and pop the servo back on, just like that right there, back into place, noting that that angle right there is where it originally was, and then you can let go from there, and then come back in with your spring screw and pop it back down in there. Now there is a little circle housing right here that the spring fits into, so just make sure that it lines up properly and that it's actually going down into that pit, and then come back in and tighten that back down. There we go. So the servo properly back into place. As you can see, the tires are spinning around there. Okay, now on to the axle replacements and the outer cups. So for this process, basically you're just going to remove the tires, pull the screws out of the end of the tires right here, and just use regular screwdriver. Actually need a larger tip on this one. And then just go ahead and unscrew the tires till they pop off. Take these screws out of the way, lay your tires down. Now take note that there is a nut that fits on the inside of there. It's currently right there, stuck to the end of that. So just take that and pop it into the tire for the moment, set it aside. And then from here, we're going to remove the actual axle. Now when you go to remove this, make sure you have bearings out on the outer front side here, and you also have a set of bearings, if I'm not mistaken, a set of bearings, yeah, on the inside here. So when you go to get this axle out of here, you can really just kind of use a screwdriver and push on the end of this right here until it pops out. Try to make sure those bearings don't come out with it. So actually the back bearing did come out. In that case, I'm just going to pop it off and stick it back in there like that. Just slide it out and make sure those bearings push back into that pit like that right there. So, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do the front right axle. So when you slide this in here, you see there's a little groove right there. Just make sure that that fits into the axle housing around the bearings there, and then when it pops out the other end, it should look like that right there. You can see that it's nice and flush. And then for the sake of this, I'm going to go ahead and put this tire back on, because that's going to help me get the axles lined in here after the fact. So in order to do this, you're going to want to put, there's a little pin that comes with this, and you're going to drop that pin right into the hole there, and then it's going to fall out the other side on you. So get this at an angle here so you guys can see what's going on. So I'm pushing that pin into that little hole, and what's going to happen here is your lock nut from the back of the tire is going to seat into that groove right there, so you can go ahead and put your lock nut back into place like that, your hex bolt. And on this process, on the front and the back, I prefer to use a little bit of Loctite tape on here, and you'll want to put this on in the same direction that it threads, so go clockwise with it as you put this stuff on here. And what this is going to do is help keep the tires on just a little bit better. And the bolts for this do have a little kind of a, I don't know if you can see that, but a little plastic piece. It's kind of a built-in Loctite for the inside of that, but it never hurts to have extra protection. So from there, I'm going to go ahead and put this tire on. You want to make sure that it locks down onto that nut right there, and then go ahead and put your bolt on. Start tightening it down. And you don't have to go all the way tight on this, just enough to hold the axle into place while you're performing this modification. So I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the other side and do this one. We need to go ahead and put these 6 screws back in to lock down the upper section of the frame here. So I'm just going to put this, drop this down out of the way so it can rest on the desk there. And I'm going to go ahead and put these 6 screws back into place. Alright, so I've got all the screws back into the top frame assembly, the 6 screws, 3 on either side there, and that locks the servo arm and everything kind of back into place there. Alright, so the tricky part here is when you go to reassemble the upper shock system, you need to get the tires in alignment and just make sure everything stays in alignment long enough for you to get that bracket back on. So on this front side right there, you see on the inner ball cup, you just want to line up your pins on that and slide it back in just like the original dog bones lock into those. Spin this tire around and get that in place. So your upper control arms are going to come down to this lower section right here on both sides, and then you're going to bring your front end right here along with your pins. You can go ahead and kind of put these two pins in if you want to get it started. Just go ahead and slide them in the bottom, because the thread on these is actually up here, so you can go ahead and slide those into place to get everything lined up. So go ahead and do that. This is kind of the tricky part here. If you can get one in, then you'll be golden on getting the other one in. So there goes my one side right there. Back into place, and the other side, second side, if I can get this in the light there, is sliding back into place right there, and it goes back through there. So, and then the same thing on this side. You see the pin sticking out right there. You just need to align this control arm up enough there so it pops back into place. So from there, you want to go ahead and tighten these down. Now these don't really screw in too tight, so when you go to screw these back in, just kind of finger tight, you know, don't over torque them. Like right there, it still wants to spin, but the bolt is locked into place, and that's just as far as it goes on that. So just make a note of that. Okay, so now that we have the two pins down here with the control arms back in place, the axles are in alignment into the ball cups right there. We're going to put these 4 screws back in. Okay, so now that we have this reassembled, the front end, the last thing we need to do here before we put the front plate back on is go ahead and get our shocks into place. So you just put that top screw, and also if these screws fall out, as I mentioned in my previous video, if you look closely, you can see that there's a little, looks almost like a metal washer. So the way the bolt goes through, on this side it's flat and it slides in through the hole. This has a stopper on the end of it, so the stopper goes in between the frame and the shock itself. So if you try to go in reverse, the thing, it's going to slide out, but as you can see right there, I just try to get a close-up on it so that you can see that that metal bracket piece stays locked onto that side right there. So we'll go ahead and get the shocks screwed back in here. Alright, so last but not least, what we need to do is we need to go ahead and put the front bumper / skid plate back into place. And one thing to note here as you do this, there's the 2 screw holes right here in the front and the back, and there are 2 small pins, plastic little nubs sticking up right there that do align with 2 holes in the bottom of the skid plate that you can see right here. So you want to make sure that the holes align with the lower control arm pins that are sticking out right there. So just pop that back onto the control arm pins like so, and then when you get right here, you want to push down just a little bit till that pops into place, those 2 little right there. And so you also want to note that you do have 3 different, or 2, well, out of the 3 screws, 2 are the same, 1 is not. So the 2 longer screws, let me get these over here. The 2 longer screws are going to go into the bottom skid plate, and the smaller screw is going to go into the top. So I'm going to go ahead and get the first screw going in here. Alright guys, so there you have it. I went ahead and slapped some batteries in here, and I'm just going to go ahead and give it a little spin just to make sure everything's functioning properly. See the tires rolling out there. So there you have it. Front axle upgrade, rear axle upgrade on the HBX 12891. I hope this video helped you guys out. As always, thanks for watching Frank's Tech Help. Peace.
the planet E. Shortcut when I would like to take you on a trip. Come on along now and listen to our tunes. Just sit back as we go zoom, zoom, zoom. Who she and what's the trouble?